Thank you all for being here, and thank you to Jeannie for such a generous introduction. Who here is at the Capitol for the very first time? I am so happy to see you. That is so important. So, as Jeannie said, I am a co-founder of Save Our Schools Arizona, and this is not what I expected to be doing in my retirement. Public schools are the centers of our communities, and our local public schools must be well-funded and well-resourced to create safer, stronger communities and a stronger economy for our state. I come to this work not as a teacher or an education professional, but as a mother, a grandmother, a daughter, a sister, all public school attendees. My father, as Jeannie said, was born in Bisbee in 1919. That's the first of a few numbers in this talk. Thanks to public schools, he was able to rise from abject poverty to become a successful scientist.
Louder, please, louder!
Let me see. Is this better? Sorry. Thank you. Thank you. Because of public schools all over the West, where he bounced around during his childhood, generations of a family have become contributing members to society and the nation's economy. So I dedicate everything I do for public schools to my father. It's evident when we do the math on Arizona's education system that our students, teachers, and staff have been robbed for decades. Arizona's public school system is the worst funded in the nation, according to a study conducted by National Education Law Center that compares all U.S. states and Washington, D.C. I know you've heard this before, but the toll is human. Arizona children are not getting the quality education they deserve. So let's do the math. Arizona spends $5,900 less per child than the national median. This means schools have been forced to slash budgets for teachers and staff, programs, nurses, counselors, extracurriculars, advanced coursework, the arts, and more. Arizona ranks 49th in teacher salary. If we do the math, this means fewer teachers are attracted to the profession and fewer teachers stay to do the job. In sum, our teacher shortage is fueled by this insufficient funding. Thousands of children attend classes with no idea if their teacher today will be a sub, the school principal, or just no one. Arizona classrooms are the second most crowded in the nation. If we do the math here, it means that 30 to 40 kids are frequently put into one classroom. And if we divide the number of minutes a teacher has to offer for individualized or small group instruction, the number becomes a decimal per child. Arizona does not fund all-day kindergarten. The state funds half a day, and school districts have to sweep funds from other programs to cover their costs. Arizona children are not getting what they need from this state legislature. Arizona K-12 funding is also extremely inequitable, and this hits children of color, students in poverty, and rural students the hardest. Arizona is one of only 9 states to not offer additional resources to children in poverty, who typically need 3 times the funding and resources to achieve grade level proficiency. My children graduated from public schools back in the early 2000s, and when I started paying attention again, I was shocked. Along with thousands of Arizonans newly awakened by the political cataclysm in 2016, I wondered, how did this happen? Reaganomics instilled the idea in Americans that government is not your friend and that taxation was an unnecessary evil. In the early 1990s, cutting taxes became the rage and the shrinking of state budgets began. 30 years later, Arizona just doesn't have the revenue it needs to fund public services, including schools, public safety, transportation, healthcare, and more. In fact, today we give away nearly double the entire state budget in tax exemptions. The problem was exacerbated by cuts made during the 2008 recession. Many of these cuts have not been restored. The responsibility of K-12 funding has actually shifted to individuals via sales taxes, property taxes, PTO, PTA fundraising, and local bond and override elections. You can see how that leads to gross inequity. Our current state leaders refuse to champion funding for schools, even though they know it is the #1 economic driver for our state. Just like corporate America, they don't look past the upcoming quarter or the upcoming election. When Governor Ducey campaigned for governor in 2014, he opposed Prop 204, which would have raised $1 billion per year for Arizona schools. Since, he has heaped praise on himself for modest investments that haven't moved the needle, including 20 by 2020 teacher raises. Actually, it's been shown that's more like 16%, that still fall below our neighboring states and virtually every state in the nation. Higher math says that 20% or 16% of not much is also not much. Moreover, Governor Ducey and the majority party have fought every funding proposal that citizen groups have brought to the ballot, including voter-approved Prop 208. Unfortunately, doing the math there means we now have to subtract $1 billion of promised education funding every single year in Arizona. The Arizona Legislature, right here, makes the vast majority of decisions around education funding in our state. Arizona legislative leadership has long favored budget cuts and corporate tax cuts over funding public services. Each year, this body spends nearly $22 billion in tax cuts, credits, and tax expenditures, while spending only $14 billion in its state general fund. The fund required to fund all schools, transportation, healthcare, public safety, and everything we know as a government service. So I always insist on talking in terms of revenue rather than taxes. Who wants to pay more taxes? I don't think very many of us would. Yeah, there are a few, but most of us say, no, I agonize right around tax day. But we do want good schools, libraries, a future with water, broadband, bridges that don't collapse, and other services that our government is obligated to provide. It's not a news flash, thanks, for you that the past decade, actually several decades, have been guided by the invisible hand of special interests intent on converting our public education system to a for-profit system. For this reason, the Arizona State Legislature has fought to pass ESA and STO private school vouchers year after year. I urge you, in fact, to go to sosaznetwork.org and read our blog series on the foundations and think tanks behind this privatization work. Some of those names you'll recognize, Americans for Prosperity, which is part of the Koch brothers, or American Federation for Children, which was led by Betsy DeVos for many years, but the Walton Foundation. But some of those names will not be familiar to you. And in fact, the Koch Foundation, or the Koch coctopus, we call it, has laid out a new policy or practice over the last several years of cloaking their work in all kinds of other organizations that are named in our blog. So we have to be able to learn to recognize those names and know that they are not on the side of public education. Their tentacles are everywhere in Arizona. In order to fix this classroom crisis once and for all, Arizona voters must elect pro-public education leaders who will prioritize funding our schools. We have done the math, and we know that there are paths to victory for the governor's race, the superintendent's race, and for flipping the balance of power to a legislature that favors public education. Leading up to November 8th, we need everyone here to support these efforts by joining us to call voters, knock doors. It's going to take all of us, and no one should be on the sidelines. November 8th, 2022 is when we turn this tide. Thank you very much.